Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and I am back at it to go over the top IDP takeaways from week 4, where this week, my word, the injury Grim Reaper was having a field day today, taking out a bunch of our beloved IDPs and just creating another mess of waivers to sort through. But I'm here to help. We'll look at kind of who filled in for our injured starters, how close were those roles to that of the starters, as well, and as it relates to all these many linebacker injuries, essentially. I'll even look to kind of put out like a preferred order for how I'd kind of target these waiver options because there are quite a few. But of course, take in the information as you feel and sort them as you like. But again, we're going to go through them all. And like in previous weeks, just a reminder, I'm not going over every single game for this recap pod, just our biggest takeaways that can help us prep for waivers, which we'll need for this week and the early portion of this week. So yeah, basically this episode, I mean, it's just impossible at this point to not talk about all these injuries from this past week here in week 4. And they just so happen to mostly be at linebacker. So as much as I'd love to find some interesting stuff for defensive linemen and defensive backs, the most important news is going to be surrounding the linebackers this week. I will sneak in a few notes at the end about some defensive linemen and defensive backs, some of it injury related as well, because like I said, the injury Grim Reaper is a real SOB. As always, you'll find the full breakdowns for every team and their IDPs in the IDP Fantasy Report article when it releases on Tuesday, at which you can get access to with a subscription to PFF Plus. And again, I'm sorry that it was free the first 2 weeks and now it's locked to subscribers only. One of those things that's not really my call, but I will say I think along with everything else you get on the site, well worth the price. And I may be biased, but I do believe that IDP article is the key piece of content to help you to dominate your IDP leagues. Now, that being said, we'll hit on a lot of the key pieces that will be in that article today, or at least some of them. And again, injuries were the name of the game today. We already lost Alex Singleton, and Foye Oluokun to injured reserve just heading into Sunday. Potentially Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence is expected to land on IR. And now you add to the list Troy Anderson, Trey Hendrickson, Devontae Wyatt, Josh Hines-Allen, Kyle Duggar, Fred Warner, Shaq Thompson, Josie Jewell, Servassier Dennis. And that's just on the IDP side of things. So I'll try to get through this thing without breaking into tears, essentially. And let's get started with the two teams where we knew about the injury situation heading into Sunday, at least, the Jacksonville Jaguars being one of those teams with Foye Oluokun on injured reserve, Devin Lloyd dealing with a knee injury. So what we got from this Jaguars team, which was previously a very heavy rotation when everyone was healthy, we got that cut down to a 3-man rotation this week. So Jaguars linebackers were led by Chad Muma, playing very close to a full-time role. Ryan Nielsen just couldn't help himself, apparently just had to take Muma off for at least a handful of snaps, which I'm sure if they had a fourth linebacker available to them today, they'd probably keep that exact rotation from the past few weeks, but they were in a desperate spot here. So Muma becomes a name worth considering now going forward if Devin Lloyd misses more time. We already know Foye's out, obviously, but we'll monitor Devin Lloyd's knee injury heading into week 5, see how that goes. After Chad Muma, Ventrell Miller actually led the team in total tackles with 10. Despite not playing full-time snaps, he played the role that Devin Lloyd has been playing this season, where he's coming off the field on almost all obvious passing downs or third downs. So he played 84% of the snaps, which is not bad. And then Yasir Abdullah was also sprinkled in there, for shits and giggles on a 29% snap share. You have to be in a very deep league to even consider adding him this week. But that's kind of what we got from the Jaguars linebackers and what we could kind of expect if Devin Lloyd misses another time or another game. if he does come back, we could expect that to go back to kind of what it was in previous weeks, just with Yasser Abdullah playing the Ventrell Miller role and then kind of so on up the depth chart. Um, okay, and the other linebacker injury situation that we knew about, honestly, probably the saddest one with our guy Alex Kingleton, done for the year due to a torn ACL. The Denver Broncos are already a thin team at the position, and we saw them lean on Cody Barton as LB1 as expected. Barton stepped in to run the defense. He played 100% of snaps for them and led the team with 10 total tackles as well. I'd expect that they just kind of continue to roll with Barton as their LB1 going forward for now, just as the most experienced NFL starter of the group, which isn't saying much, but still, the bigger question mark, I guess, was what the Broncos LB2 role would look like. We saw Christian Welch get like the third most snaps of the linebacker core heading into this week. So he was kind of like the odds-on favorite. However, it was Justin Sternad who stepped into the secondary linebacker role. He played 77% of snaps, which is fine for deeper leagues. I know he had a sack in this game, but just the 4 tackles, which is just kind of the nature of the snap share and playing in a man-heavy defense as well. So that being said, Justin Sternad can be considered a waiver wire target in deep leagues. Barton in more widely what am I saying? Barton in more shallow leagues, he should be the more widely targeted linebacker from the Denver Broncos is essentially what I'm saying. All right, next up is where we do start to get to the new injuries to the linebacker position this week. And we actually got a couple to monitor now in Carolina where Shaq Thompson was carted off at the end of the third quarter. He had been the lone every down linebacker up until this point, but unfortunately was carted off, which again, never a good sign. Thompson had been having a pretty nice season, but this is obviously going to be concerning. Now, Josie Jewell would be the easy answer as the next man up, and he still could be, but he also left this game with a hamstring injury 5 snaps into the fourth quarter and did not return. So who does that leave us? Well, we talked about how Trevin Wallace had been cutting in slightly to Josie Jewell's snaps last week on our start sit show, and he may be in for a bigger role now going forward here with Shaq Thompson and or Josie Jewell out. Wallace played 100% of the fourth quarter snaps in this game as the lone every down linebacker with Josie Jewell and Shaq Thompson out. There was another though, and one we talked about during the preseason a little bit, but if both Thompson and Josie Jewell are out, then Clouden Shereless is the other guy to step into a larger role. Unlikely to be a 100% snap role, but you never know. He did play ahead of Trevin Wallace in the preseason, but this pecking order in week 3 kind of gives us a little bit more clarity on what that depth chart should look like 1 to 4. And Trevin Wallace would be kind of the priority of the two, assuming one of Shaq Thompson or Josie Jewell misses time. Another injured linebacker this week, Servassier Dennis of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, had carved out a role as the third down / passing down linebacker, cutting into KJ Britt snaps this season. But he left this game very early with a shoulder injury after just 5 snaps. So with Dennis out, KJ Britt stayed on the field for almost every snap, giving him a nice kind of value boost. Should Servassier Dennis miss time, this isn't really like any obvious, or there isn't really any obvious other linebacker on the team that might step into a starting role or something resembling what Servassier Dennis was doing. They were already pretty thin there, and it's just hard to replicate the Dennis system. The only other route that I could see this team going is if Antoine Winfield Jr. comes back next week. Christian Izien has played well, that they might feel comfortable keeping him in a sizable role, run more dime, and let Winfield, Whitehead, and Christian Izien be on the field at the same time next to Levante David as the lone linebacker in passing situations to keep their, kind of plan of avoiding KJ Britt in those passing down situations. But this is all kind of hypothetical. And it's also assuming Dennis misses time. And if Winfield comes back. So we'll hopefully get more clarity on both of those players as the week goes on, but just some thoughts there. Okay, on to one of the top IDPs from week 4, Mr. Troy Anderson, comes through with a pick 6 and 16 tackles, a monster performance by him. We talked about him in the start sit show as well, and me having him inside the top 20 linebackers. And man, did he deliver. However, he was lost in his, what could have been lost in his big game is that he suffered a knee injury late and did not return. It might not be serious. It's always hard to tell with these late game injuries because while he didn't return to the game, there wasn't exactly like a huge window for him to do so. I think his final snap came around 4 minutes or so left in the fourth quarter. He wasn't playing exactly a full-time role prior to his injury. He came off the field on some obvious passing downs, but it wasn't a huge hit to his snap share. About 83% of snaps through the first 3 quarters, 76% for the game. So if Troy Anderson misses time, then JD Bertrand becomes somewhat interesting for the short term, and I'd expect him to be coming off the field on those obvious passing downs as well, while Caden Ellis holds the 100% snap roll job there. All right, one more linebacker injury to get here, and it's a big one. Fred Warner left this game near the end of the first half with an ankle injury and did not return. Now, Warner was available for the team's post-game presser, and he provided a little bit of an update on his ankle, essentially confirming that he just couldn't get back into the game with the way his ankle was. He'll probably undergo an MRI on Monday to hopefully give us some clearer answers. And honestly, shout out to Fred for giving us the pick 6 and still tying for the team lead or the second in team lead in total tackles. That's a Herculean IDP effort there that we have to salute. So, of course, Devondre Campbell, he was a full-time player, but in Warner's absence, we saw Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles step into a near full-time role. He played all but 2 snaps in the second half with Fred Warner out, so 94% of snaps for the day, or for the second half. Hopefully Warner doesn't miss time, but if he does, then DFF, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, will become one of the top waiver targets of the week. So with all those injuries and all those names, how I would kind of prioritize them if you're in deeper leagues and assuming these are kind of your best options available, I'd kind of rank them like this. So at the top, Cody Barton, we know Kingleton is out. Rest of season wise, Barton is kind of in the best spot to play the most snaps out of this bunch going forward. Then I would go with Trevin Wallace. Both Shaq Thompson getting carted off and Josie Jewell dealing with a hamstring injury. Like, it seems like there's going to be a role for Trevin Wallace next week. And with bye weeks also starting next week, Wallace could be a good bet to target here, assuming Thompson and or Jewell will be out for week 5. Chad Muma, we know Chad Muma is going to have a role here because Foye's on IR. We'll see if Devin Lloyd's knee injury causes him to miss more time, but he should have some viability at least for another 3 games or so. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles of the 49ers is next. Fred Warner's ankle dependent. We may get clarity on that before our waivers have to run. But as far as snap volume goes, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles would be in the best spot to play close to a full-time role amongst the rest of the kind of names here in the latter half of this list. Because the next name up is KJ Britt, also not in a bad spot, assuming Servasia Dennis misses time. Again, I laid out the other possibility if Winfield is back and something we might see for how they adjust to that, but still worth a shot if he's available. Then I would put Justin Sternad of the Denver Broncos coming back to Denver because, we know that this is a long-term injury here for Alex Singleton. Obviously, it's not a full-time role, but Sternad should see a fine role around that 75% snap share range going forward. Now, could be more or less than that, depending on the week. So that fluctuation and non-full-time role kind of devalues him some, but still a fine option for deeper leagues. Then I put JD Bertrand. I don't think Anderson's injury is all that serious, but just in case, Bertrand should see a similar role to what we just talked about with Justin Sternad, just for maybe a shorter period of time, even if Anderson is out, because Nate Landman also could return once his IR stint is up, and he'd jump ahead of Bertrand on the depth chart if Anderson's injury was more than a 1-week absence. Ventrell Miller, also depending on Devin Lloyd, is somewhat interesting. He'll see the field regardless because of that crazy rotation in Jacksonville, but could be the snaps of an LB2 if Lloyd's knee causes him to miss more time, though not a full-time role, or he could be an LB3 with the spot of being, LB4 once Foye comes off IR as well. So some short-term value there for Ventrell Miller. And lastly, Cloud and Sherrillis, another one that could or couldn't be valuable depending on what's going on with Shaq Thompson and Josie Jewell. Not a full-time role either. Assume that one of Thompson or Jewell won't be long-term. So that would make Sherrillis kind of LB3 in this defense, which just isn't all that valuable unless LB1 and LB2 are out. And in which case, Trevin Wallace is still the top target there. Okay, that's enough linebacker talk, but sadly, not enough injury talk, apparently. We also lost a potential top 12 safety to an ankle injury this week, Kyle Dugger. He left this game at the end of the first quarter with an ankle injury. Dugger was seen in a walking boot after the game. So usually safety replacements for injured starters aren't all that interesting. But because of Duggar's role in this New England Patriots defense, it's at least worth looking at who replaced him and how close those snaps resembled what we get from Duggar typically. So Jalen Hawkins was the next man up to absorb Kyle Duggar's snaps next to Jabril Peppers. Peppers wore the green dot in Kyle Duggar's absence. He had been wearing it before. And the usage is pretty damn close. Hawkins played 100% of the snaps with Duggar out of the game. 55% of those snaps came in the box, which is right in line with what we typically see from Kyle Duggar. I got Kyle Duggar's snap breakdown from the first 3 weeks here pulled up, and you can see exactly what that kind of looks like. Around 41% in the box through weeks 1 to 3, just 35% deep. So then if I pull up Jalen Hawkins' snap breakdown, he played, again, or actually played a little bit more in the box, 55% in the box in this one, but also just around 35% deep. So if you have the option to grab Jabril Peppers first, then I do that. But if not, Hawkins isn't a bad consolation prize if Kyle Duggar does indeed miss time. Okay, next up, I wanted to highlight a rookie defensive lineman and kind of a follow-up from last week because I had talked about Laiatu Latu landing his first NFL sack last week, Kwity Paye suffering an injury, that could allow more snaps for Latu. And this week, Latu did indeed play a career-high 46% of 46 total defensive snaps, which was a career-high 66% snap share. That snap share was actually second among the team's edges behind only Deo Odeingbo. He was actually leading the Colts edges at one point late in the game, and Odeingbo just kind of snuck in ahead of him late. Unofficially, before review, Laiatu Latu delivered 4 total pressures and a QB hit in this game. Not a ton from an IDP perspective, but he was also, again, prior to review, a top 5 graded player on this Colts defense and did not look out of place against the Steelers this week. So promising signs from a dynasty perspective, and also nice to see for potential startability should Kwity Paye miss another game here for the Colts. One more edge I wanted to cover was Dorrance Armstrong of the Washington Commanders, who delivered 1.5 sacks this week, only had a half sack coming into this game through 3 weeks, but delivered a bigger performance here and wanted to highlight him because he was somebody who flew kind of under the radar this offseason. He was on my breakout list this summer, and we talked about him in the offseason, but he has a really nice opportunity in this defense going forward, especially if he can continue to play like he did today. He played 59% of the snaps, which has been about his norm, and dominated on those snaps with an, again, unofficial before review, unofficial 86.8 pass rush grade, along with a 27.8% win rate and pressure rate in this one. So definitely somebody to kind of keep in mind as bye weeks kick in next week and as we need options going forward. Armstrong definitely has the ability and the snaps to be a starting IDP option. Okay, finally, last thing I wanted to cover was some cornerbacks because there had been requests for the position, and the thing that kind of stands out as an important piece to kind of keep in mind that I wanted to touch on here revolves around the nickel corners, who can be really productive for IDP, but they can also dud out and do very little from time to time. And a lot of that has to do with fluctuating snap shares, which often has everything to do with the offenses they're facing, where teams that don't play a lot of 11 personnel, for example, there won't be a lot of use for the nickel corner. And then facing offenses who do play more 11 personnel, we will see those players get a lot more snaps. So that with more snaps, obviously you have a better shot to produce. Now, one of those names I think worth highlighting is Keyshawn Nixon of the Green Bay Packers, who typically is the team's nickel corner, and we see that fluctuating snap share quite a bit. For example, he played 68% of snaps in week 1, 84% of snaps in week 2, 74% of snaps in week 3, and that has everything to do with facing 11 personnel and the dependent on the offense, right? So we can kind of predict those patterns a little bit and get a feel for how often these types of players will see the field. However, this week, Keyshawn Nixon played 97% of the defensive snaps, despite the Vikings, their opponent, not being a team that plays a lot of 11 personnel. And, coming into this week, Minnesota had played only about 62% of their offensive snaps in 11 personnel, which is slightly below average. And even this week, they only played 54% of their snaps in 11 personnel. So what gives? Well, Jair Alexander did not play in this game, which meant that Keyshawn Nixon actually played more outside and in the slot instead of just in the slot, and had a really productive day because #usage, right? 7 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble. So just an important kind of note regarding Keyshawn Nixon here. If Jair Alexander misses more time, it's a nice sign for his usage, as he'll be a much safer play and more matchup proof in those situations where they aren't playing, maybe more 11 personnel heavy teams, which is nice to see for Keyshawn Nixon's value. Again, dependent on if Jair Alexander will be out or not. Now, I wanted to throw in two more DBs in similar situations as Keyshawn Nixon. Not so much that Keyshawn Nixon of this week, where he played outside and in the slot, but that nickel corner role, essentially, right? So Kyler Gordon of the Chicago Bears was near full time as well this week, but that might not always be the case, right? So Kyler Gordon played 90% of snaps in this game, was productive with 7 tackles, a fumble recovery. But they played the Rams this week, who, along with the Atlanta Falcons, are one of the 2 most 11 personnel heavy offenses in the entire NFL. The Rams spent 92% of their snaps in 11 personnel this week. They led the league coming into week 4 at 86%. The Falcons were 83% coming into the week in second. And then actually Atlanta spent like 98% of their snaps in 11 personnel this week. So if you have nickel corners going up against the Falcons or the Rams, fire them up, right? That's kind of the lesson here. And the other name on the opposite end of things, or at least the opposite end of usage this week, I kind of warned about Kansas City Chiefs defensive back Chamari Connor in our start sit episode this week, because he was in a similar role as these nickel corners and seeing the field as a reaction to the opposing offenses, and had been on fire heading into this week. But we talked about how that wasn't necessarily sustainable, and there will be riskier weeks than others in plugging him into lineups. And this week being one of those weeks, going up against the Los Angeles Chargers, who are a run heavy offense, who do not play much 11 personnel at all. They were 54% coming into the week. I think they played just 59% in 11 personnel this week. So as a result, Chamari Connor played just 55% of the total defensive snaps for the Chiefs, after playing 82% last week against the 11 personnel heavy Atlanta Falcons that we just talked about. And he just managed 3 tackles in this game, right? So that's the kind of floor that you worry about with players like this. While at the same time, those ceiling games that he front loaded his 2024 with so far, those aren't quite a guarantee either, even when he is expected to play more, right? So just kind of understanding that this is the kind of player we should be aware of when to play him, when to not play him. And I will at least look to highlight him in our start sit episode every week as well, as well as a number of the nickel corners that we just talked about, when they have those positive matchups and when not. And then if you guys feel like you want to play them, based on that, you can definitely have at least the information to act on there. But yeah, that's it for me. Again, quick little recap, not everything, but just kind of the main takeaways here. The injuries obviously sucked this week on both sides of the ball, really. But again, just want to thank you guys for tuning in, reaching out, liking, subscribing. I appreciate you all. If you haven't done so yet, there's still time again to like, subscribe to the YouTube channel or leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. I would really greatly appreciate that. As always, want to shout out the PFF data collection team, for whom this data would not be possible at such a fast rate. Forever and always the best team in the multiverse. And then, as always, feel free to ask questions in the YouTube comments as well. I try to get back to those as soon as possible. I'll be back doing a full week 5 IDP preview with, speaking of cornerbacks, yeah, we got someone who knows all about them. The cornerback whisperer himself, Johnny the Greek from the IDP show. That'll be out Thursday morning. Again, be sure to check out the IDP fantasy report when it drops on Tuesday. Again, well worth the PFF Plus subscription. If you like this information, then that is just me again doing the same thing, except for every team and including charts for all IDPs. So I'll also have the IDP rankings up on Thursday morning at the latest, as well as the start sit episode. But thank you all again. Good luck going forward in your waiver wire claims. And until next time, peace out.